funding has been abruptly pulled. Had a nonprofit ED who actually frankly asked me, Christian, do you have any ideas about how do we talk about the work that our communities are doing when funders have stopped funding us? They are wary and afraid of political scrutiny and being put under the microscope about their work.
Welcome, Dr. Christian Bell Onyemali. I'm so thrilled to have you joining us for our Thought Leadership Series interview. I love to always start by understanding a bit about your own journey. I'd love to hear about your personal why for getting into social impact consulting. What inspired your current direction, and how has that vision evolved over time?
Thanks, Anniedi. So my journey into this started almost 15 years ago when I was working for a school district here in the Austin area, where I learned about how to help organizations understand what are we doing, how well have we done it, and who is benefiting from the work that we're doing. So just being really clear about that has helped, is where I got started in the work. And something that I've noticed over time is as I work with organizations, whether that is a large urban school district, like the one where I was working at, or a smaller nonprofit that's serving a local community, or a large nonprofit that is serving a national audience, is a lot of times they are asking these questions when it's too late or it's too far along in their journey, either because they have a funder who's asking these questions, or they've had they're just too late in their journey. They didn't think about how do we know what we are successful and what we're doing is successful from the beginning. And so a lot of times you see this actually that it comes up in their impact reports. And so their impact reports, they start off as report cards. They're just reporting on here's what we did. We served this number of people. We had this number of workshops. We have, had, this number of fellows who graduated from our program. And that is great information. That's great for them to be sharing that. They do need to be able to communicate that. But what I take them from is saying that their impact report is no longer their report card. It's actually a calling card for them, where they are calling in bigger funding. They're calling in these supporters of their work, where they're able to really champion and shout from the rooftops, here is the work that we're doing. Here's the successes that we've seen. Here's people whose lives have actually changed, because of our work. So that's what my main focus is really taking them from an impact report that's a report card to an actual calling card that showcases all the great work that they're doing.
Woo, how inspiring that is. And for such a time as this, it seems everywhere we turn, there's news headlines, right, of how challenging, right, the funding environment is, particularly for those in the social impact sector right now. What urgent challenges would you say that companies in the social impact space are overlooking right now? And how are you addressing that with nonprofits and foundations and corporate social responsibility leaders right now?
So right now, the biggest challenge is around this DEI backlash, right? That's coming from the federal level. And it's leading to, frankly, chaos in the sector. Funding has been abruptly pulled. Funders who are not even in the federal government, they're not even in the federal government. They are private funders. They're stopping funding of organizations who are serving underrepresented communities because they are wary and afraid of political scrutiny and being put under the microscope about their work, and potentially being sued for the work that they're supporting. And so the thing about that is I have the fortune and sometimes the displeasure of living in the state of Texas, where we have been facing these issues for a couple of years now. It all started, with Senate Bill 17, which is a bill that was passed, I think it was 2 years ago, that in effect stopped all DEI programming at the higher ed level, and it's since trickled down to other parts of the state, including our public education, our K through 12 system. So we have had to really become savvy in this state, if you are supporting that kind of work, about how do we talk about our work? how do we still support these communities? Because that's not changing. That does not change at all. How do we continue to support this work? But how are we being more sophisticated about it? How are we still keeping true to our values? And so for a lot of orgs, that is moving from they're not taking away the DEI language. They're simply talking more about their work from an outcomes frame perspective. I had a nonprofit ED who actually frankly asked me, Christian, do you have any ideas about how do we talk about the work that our communities are doing, and that the communities that we serve, when funders have stopped funding us? They have frankly said, we're because you serve these communities and you're open about it and that's your direction, we can't support you anymore. So how do we keep talking about that? Because we know that these communities that we're working with, they still need us. We still believe in them. We still want to see them successful in the area that we're working with them in. So that's really for these organizations to reframe their language. So instead of saying we support DEI in education, it becomes we build data-informed pathways that increase college and career readiness, right? They were always doing that. That's always the work that they were doing, but now they're simply reframing it.
That reframe is so powerful. And I love that you use that term data informed, because many times folks feel like data can be a little bit of an intimidating topic, right? It can feel sort of out of reach. But you bring a unique lens in this playing field as a data and evaluation strategist. Can you walk us through an example or a case study of how your approach to measurement or data use led to a breakthrough, either in how you deliver your services or demonstrate your impact to stakeholders?
I've worked with a number of different organizations, many of whom have been funded by major funding organizations like the Gates Foundation or the National Science Foundation. So these are organizations who have big dollars, and they also have big expectations around how you are sharing your impact. What does impact mean? What do outcomes mean? And so for a lot of organizations, and my favorite activity that I actually do with them is a workshop that I lead with them called Activity to Impact. And I actually recently did this with a statewide nonprofit that serves educators. And so what they were facing is they are probably about 15, almost 20 years in existence, and they do amazing work. They are very well known for the work that they do, but they recently were facing a board that had increasing expectations around how they are communicating and systematically measuring their impact and the outcomes that they're achieving in their work. And so in the session that I led with them, we really started to unpack like what's the difference between an output and an outcome. And that's something that organizations, they struggle so much with, that because a lot of times they're focused so much on what did we do, because there's a lot to do. They are doing a lot, especially, if you're serving, educators across an entire state, there's a lot that they're doing. And so they focus on, okay, we met with these number of educators. We funded this many scholarships. We've done these activities. But what did that lead to in terms of change for the people who are participating in your work? What does change look like? How do you know you were successful in the change that you expected to see? So having just this simple, for me, it's simple, but I know for a lot of the organizations I work with and leaders, it takes a minute for them to understand, like, this is a mindset shift. And what are we valuing? What are we really placing as the most important thing for us to be considering? And it's not these outputs. It's not only what we did, it's the change that we made. And so it helps them to, once they get that mindset shift, it really changes so much about their approach and what they're doing. Like they're thinking more about like how do we refine our program, what we're doing, what are the outcomes, and being clear on what are the outcomes that we're wanting to see, and then just being able to make a clearer case for support. So whenever their CEO is going to those board meetings and she's working with the team for weeks in advance to prep those files and all those things that you need to show to the board about here's what we've done and here's the successes that we've made, it just makes for a stronger case of support from the board and then eventually donors as well. So then now they have, what I call like the receipts, that credible data that shows that their work is actually working.
Come on, receipts. I love that you shared, right, going from outputs to outcomes, because many social impact players are facing increasing competition for funding in a very crowded arena. Can you share how your proprietary method or framework builds organizational capacity to help them deliver on their missions at scale?
My framework is the Impact First Blueprint, and it's really designed to help leaders at various points or various roles within social impact organizations, especially nonprofits. So it's designed to help whether you are an executive director, whether you are the development officer, whether you are the chief program officer, and being able to speak clearly about your work, make a case for your work, no matter what your role is. So we start off with an impact readiness scan, and that just tells, a diagnostic of where they are as an organization and how they assess their impact. And that is something that is a baseline for the entire team to be clear on. Here is where we are. Here's what we need to work on. Here's what we're doing well and to keep, we want to keep that up. And then we start thinking about the program design for fundability, which this is really designed more for your chief program officer or whatever their title is, because that is the person who is really charged with making sure that the programmatic work that we're doing is actually also fundable. It's aligned for both the mission, we're doing the work that we say from a mission perspective, but then also there's a marketing that they have to do as well. So how are we able to market this work that we're doing? And then we start thinking about those strategic impact metrics. And so this team, that's the third stage, is the strategic impact metrics. And that really is, it depends on, how it gets placed in an organization. A lot of times it's the marketing and communications team who is charged with sharing that work externally on your website and the marketing materials. And then also it could be for your chief development officer who has to speak about those things as well. Or even your grant writer, the person who's writing your grant, they want to know, what are your impact metrics? What are the things that you are measuring, and making sure we're measuring the right things? So we focus really on that third stage around what are the right things to measure and making it doable with the team that you have. So then when you go out to apply for those grants, when you're sharing your work, you have something that's very clear about the impact of the organization. And then finally, the last stage is the funder positioning strategy. And this is something that sometimes will fall with the chief development officer most times, and also for the CEO as well, because this is the person who is, going out and talking to funders, and we're just making sure that we're translating their work into language that funders will actually understand.
Such a holistic and comprehensive way of tackling this issue to make sure that everyone within the organization, every leader has the ability to articulate those outcomes, how powerful that is. You come from a unique vantage point, right? Having that nonprofit background, but you're also serving foundations. How do you integrate social impact and measurable outcomes into your work while staying true to your mission?
First, think about my own experience growing up. And so I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Was from a high risk background. I'm a first generation college graduate. I was raised by my mom, a single parent. She raised me and my two siblings. We were on free and reduced lunch from the time I started school to the time I graduated from high school. Received Pell Grants to attend undergrad and all those things, right? And so a lot of my success I attributed to these social impact organizations that I was a part of. And the primary one that I think about every single time is I was a member of 4-H. Focus more on things like leading a tutoring program and how do you grow as a leader. And those sorts of things really helps ground me in my work with organizations, is thinking about that's the community that I came from and that's the work that I did. And being a part of that sort of social impact organization really set me up for success later in life. Even now, there are things that I've learned that came from my time in 4-H. So that's one thing that I think about that grounds me in the work. A lot of it is grounded in my own, lived experience. The other is, I am a nonprofit founder myself. I founded a nonprofit 5 years ago. It started out as an organization that is a mentoring program for Black high school girls in the Austin area. And I started that because of my own experience. It was actually a near peer mentoring program where high school girls are mentored by college students at UT Austin. So that's how it started out because of my own experience. Like I had great role models, even being first generation, I had great role models about going to college, but they were all like adults and they had been there a long time ago. And I really wished, thinking back, that I had people who were my own age that I could learn from. And so that was what started. That was my impetus for starting the nonprofit, becoming a founder. It also helps ground me when I'm working with organizations because I understand the realities of running a nonprofit. What does it mean when you have to go and ask people for money? What are the funders actually asking me? Like they literally have asked me these same questions that I am pushing organizations to be thoughtful and clear about in terms of what their outcomes are. What are you hoping to see as success 10 to 15 years from now? Like, what are you doing in terms of tracking your data? Like, these are things that have been asked of me. I have also experienced this as I've worked with funders, being in meetings where it gets uncomfortable because you can't answer the question about, what changed for people, or you're scrambling, supporting a leader at midnight because we're having to get these grant reports together and we don't have the data to support the work that we've been doing. That's just not a way to be, and that's not what I want for organizations. So, from my work in consulting and how I support organizations, I really want to make sure that we are clear that we're not seeing data as a tool for judgment, right? And most times when we talk about data, it's because you're getting some sort of grade, getting some sort of assessment, someone's telling you did something wrong, you do something, it just has this negative connotation and people freeze up every time they talk about it. So, I just want them to be clear that the goal is not to set metrics for people to feel scared, but it's really to measure what matters to the communities that we're serving. So for me, it's when I think about myself, like what matters to the girls in the communities who my nonprofit worked with. And then using that insight to improve over time and making sure that data and evaluation is infused into the DNA of their organization, that they're really doing a couple of things, that they're centering community voice, because that is the most important thing. If you're just creating a program or doing work and the only people that you've shared it with or that you've pressure tested with is your staff members, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. The next thing is defining success on their own terms. I understand when you have funders, you are beholden to them to a large extent, right? They hold the purse strings. And so there is that tension of how are we meeting their expectations, but then how are you as an organization, what does success look like for you in defining that? And then finally, just resisting the pressure to water down what they're doing to make it measurable. So if you have these big goals and dreams and these big, outcomes that you want to see, stick with those, and making sure that you're not watering them down or making them less than because it feels like, oh, we're not sure how to measure that. Just being clear on that and willing to put in the work, to make sure that those things happen for you. So ultimately, for me, any of this work that we're doing is about being mission driven and metrics informed. And that for me is what really balances what makes social impact sustainable and real.
What a full circle moment you shared, right? Coming from being a recipient and beneficiary of the tremendous work that social impact organizations are doing to now giving back and paying it forward by advising leaders on how to expand their scope of impact. What advice would you give to other social impact leaders or corporate allies who want to drive deeper, more strategic change?
Be brave about asking better questions that let you know whether you're actually making change and not being stuck in just saying, here are the things that we did, here are the outputs, and collecting a bunch of data about that and reporting on that, and that being what you focus on in your impact reports. Again, that's getting back into that report card mindset. That's a report card that you're giving. But then for being really brave enough to say what changed and for whom, so that becomes your calling card for people. People are like, oh, wow, this organization is working with this group that I'm really passionate about. They have made these changes. They are really using their data to inform the work that they do. They're working with their communities. That's what makes people want to invest in you, whether it's a big time donor, which, we all want, but then also, other types of support as well. So that would be my first piece of advice. The next one would be to be brave enough to pause, reframe, and rebuild when necessary. And I actually I'm speaking about this from a personal perspective. I shared that the nonprofit I started is it started off as a mentoring program for Black girls, and we are still focused on that. But frankly, I learned that that is not fundable from a long term perspective. That funders want to see more than mentoring, and so we went through a process for a year this past year of redesigning our entire program. We're still focused on this target population, but we're focusing more on increasing the number of Black women leaders who are in STEM. And so for me, as a person who this is my baby, right? I had started this organization under this premise of what I needed, but I understood that the community A needed something more than that, and B, I needed to be thinking about how can this be more sustainable. So that's the second piece of advice I would give to organizations is just, be bold or even brave enough to stop, reframe, and rebuild when it's necessary, so that you're better partnering and serving the community.
Your impact first blueprint sounds groundbreaking in terms of really giving organizations a unique way to articulate their outcomes. If you were a foundation, right? I know you work with a lot of foundations. What do you think that foundations want nonprofits to know about their impact stories?
What foundations want organizations to know about their impact stories is that that is the heartbeat of your work. That is what you should be focused on first and foremost is the impact you're making, the story that you are telling both to foundation leaders and the community at large, because that is what is your legacy, frankly, of the work that you're doing, is your impact. Not that you did all these things, right? You did a million things. That's great. But what was the change that we actually can see as a result of the work? And making sure that you're focusing really on that impact to drive the work that you're doing. That's why I call it the impact first blueprint, because that is your first, frankly, order of business as a leader, is to be making impact.
Thank you so much, Dr. Christian Bell Onyemali, for sharing your phenomenal story and journey on supporting social impact organizations in expanding their reach and influence throughout the communities that they serve. Share with us where folks can learn more about your work.
You can find me on my website. My company name is 1111 Consulting. So it's 1111 consulting.co. I'm also on LinkedIn. So you can find both me and my company 1111 Consulting on LinkedIn as well. So I'm Christian Bell Onyemali PhD on LinkedIn.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you continued success.
Thank you.